Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat, and we got a great show for you guys today. We'll kick things off with the latest on the Penguins waiving forward Matt Nieto and who is going to take his spot on the NHL roster. Then I'll share one forward that I expect to generate some trade interest in the next week. One of the names that you haven't been hearing of, aka not a Grizzlick, not a Beauvillier, etc., etc. And then we'll close things out with a look ahead, which with a pivotal weekend coming up for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's get started on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Let's kick things off with a little bit of news that came down the pike yesterday around 2 p.m. Eastern exactly. The Penguins have placed forward Matt Nieto on waivers. Now, the Penguins, as of right now, including Nieto, have a full roster. I think it's very clear and obvious, especially considering he was a full participant in yesterday's practice. This is simply opening up a roster spot for Boko Imama, who is currently on IR but seems ready to come back going into tonight's matchup against the Philadelphia Flyers.
Yeah, that could be the case. Giving Boko Imama a little bit more runway is an awesome sight. I feel like he's definitely earned it, especially with the way this team is trending. The Penguins aren't worried about bringing up scoring or offense, and the way we discussed last episode that they're not overly worried about bringing up guys too early. If they're coming up, it's because they've earned their spot and they're coming up to get seasoning. They're coming up to get that NHL experience. It's not so much about getting your first looks or getting your first couple of games under your belt. No, the Penguins are kind of puttering in on fumes, and it's just a matter of filling out lineup spots. And for what it's worth, I liked what I saw from Imama. That was some intensity. That was some intense stuff, and he brought a lot more than what was given, I guess, to ice time wise. The numbers on like his minutes are low, but every time he seemed to be on the ice, there was at least something happening in his favor. So I like the idea of giving him more time and excited to see where it goes. It seems like he'll be the easy fix right for Nieto's spot.
Yeah, I know a lot of people immediately said, "Oh, could this be one of the young kids coming up? Could they be making way for one of the young kids?" Unfortunately, it does seem like it's just going to be Boko Imama coming off of IR and probably getting an opportunity in the lineup tonight against the Philadelphia Flyers. But I agree with you. I mean, when you look at Imama, he's on a one-year deal here. You have to know what you have in him. You have to know if you're going to bring him back. And I think it's pretty clear and obvious that after this season, Matt Nieto is not coming back to the Pittsburgh Penguins. So why keep him on the roster in lieu of a guy who you might want to figure out, hey, let's see if we actually want to bring him back on another two-way contract, somebody that can bounce between the AHL and the NHL if you don't want to start moving your prospects too often. But teams have until 2 p.m. today to claim Matt Nieto. We'll see if he goes somewhere else, and if not, he will be free and clear to be sent down to the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. Nieto is on the last year of his $800,000 contract. I'll ask you this before we move on, Horwat. Do you think if he gets either claimed or cleared and goes down to the AHL, do you think that's the last we see of Matt Nieto in a Penguins uniform?
Not so sure he'll get claimed. Waiver claims have been mostly rare this year. It's been a lot of, if a claim happens, the other team is reclaiming them. There hasn't been a ton of waiver claims made this year. I would say he clears. Is it the last we see of him? Probably. I mean, the time's running out on this season. It's not like the Penguins are trying to compete. And I think when they got him last season, it was a sense of he's going to be a depth piece to help compete, at least last year. From the beginning, I didn't understand the 2-year deal part of it. But so be it now that he has, it ended up working out for him. He ended up pretty much missing all of the first year. And now that we've made it most way through the second, that's enough. Enough is enough. This team isn't going anywhere. And even if the Penguins were trying to compete, he's not helping. So that's that. I would say that's likely the end of his tenure in Pittsburgh.
Now, I wouldn't rule out a call-up late in the season if they do go through some injuries at the forward position, similar to what we saw earlier in the year with Jesse Puljujärvi. He was placed on waivers, and then he was sent back down to the AHL, and then they dealt with a couple injuries at the NHL level, and he was one of the names that they called up. Could I see that happening with Matt Nieto? Sure. But as I mentioned earlier, it's probably signals the end of his tenure with the Penguins organization, at the very least after this year. This season, after making a surprising comeback from multiple knee injuries, he played in 31 games, scored 1 goal and 2 assists, and currently has the lowest expected goal share of any member of the Pittsburgh Penguins, except Vasily Ponomarev. The only difference is Nieto's played 31 games. Ponomarev has played 36 minutes. So I think you can kind of deduce the thought process when it comes to putting Matt Nieto on waivers and why we don't believe he's going to be claimed by 2 p.m. Eastern. But again, it's not directly leading to a call-up, so you have to sit back and wait if you still want to see some of the kids. Let's move over and talk a little trade deadline, because we are 8 days away from the NHL trade deadline, and all seems a little quiet, almost too quiet. We've seen a couple minor league moves. We've seen a couple minor names at the NHL level be moved around, but a lot of the big pieces still remain on the board. Now, we know the main names when it comes to the Pittsburgh Penguins. First and foremost, they are definitely a seller. Don't expect them to go out and buy anything. And if they do, it's going to be a la Phil Tomasino. But I just don't see many, if any, moves like that coming down the pike in the next 8 days. So the Penguins are sellers. We know the Matt Grzelcyks of the world. We know the Anthony Beauvilliers of the world. We know the Erik Karlssons of the world, as that noise continues to intensify. Josh Yohe, right after we put out our episode on Tuesday, decided he is going to provide a report on the latest revolving around Erik Karlsson, saying, quote, if Dubas could, he would trade Karlsson in a heartbeat. And then going on to say that they would obviously have to retain salary. So that is, of course, from Josh Yohe of The Athletic. My question to you here is, any change in the belief that we talked about Tuesday about Karlsson being dealt in the next week or so?
Still no. It would still just be extremely tough to do. As much as Josh Yohe reports that Kyle Dubas would trade Karlsson in a heartbeat. I mean, cool. That's great. He would, ideally, in an ideal world, all your trades happen that quickly, because you can come in with the offer and just say, yes, let's make the move. Let's make the trade call. In reality, things just take more time. Again, I don't think he's been asked to waive anything. I don't think he's been approached to waive anything in terms of his no trade clause. Or his full no move, I should say. So Erik Karlsson has the final say in any move. Again, that usually takes a lot longer than just 8 days to kind of make that approach, find a team, organize a deal, make the trade call to the league. Like I said, it took a year for him to get out of San Jose. So 8 days doesn't seem likely still, but I will say it seems more likely than what it did the other day. That's at least a start. It still seems extremely unlikely, but the percentage essentially went from, let's say, 3 to maybe 10. It's still unlikely, but it's definitely more likely.
Yeah, things change a lot during the trade deadline. I mean, yes, it took a year for him to get traded out of San Jose. But at the same time, whenever you get up to the trade deadline, there's always some of these moves that get expedited simply because of that deadline and teams being willing to kind of push over the finish line. I'm not sure that there's going to be a team that willing to push over the finish line for a 34-year-old Erik Karlsson, who has struggled in NHL play. Yes, he looked phenomenal at the Four Nations, but I'm not sure a move like this, especially considering that last part that Yohe reported, that the Penguins would have to retain salary, something that Kyle Dubas does not like to do. Those types of negotiations, matched with the fact that you mentioned that he has a full no-move clause, I think kind of makes this unlikely to happen in the next week. But again, stranger things have happened. Let's go back to last year's trade deadline. Who thought that Tomas Hertl was going to get traded to the Vegas Golden Knights? Nobody. And it happened at the 11th hour. So could that happen? Yes. Is there a non-zero chance that we like to say on this episode or on this podcast? Yes. But I still think that falls in the unlikely category, simply because if they're going to retain salary, I feel it's more likely to happen in the summertime, because everybody talks about, well, other teams are going to have more cap space, so they'll be more willing to take on Erik Karlsson's 10 or whatever it ends up being. But I think the Penguins will have to retain less salary if they wait till the summer. And that is always Kyle Dubas's, big priority when it comes to getting these big contracts off the books. But this news does do one thing for me. It tells me that he is gone by next season, that the starting game of the 2025-26 season, Erik Karlsson is also unlikely. I think I'll use that word again, unlikely to be on the Penguins roster.
I can see that. It's going to be another one of those seasons where first day of training camp, everyone looks around and goes, oh, this is a completely different team. Much like it was heading into the 23-24 season last year. I can remember kind of everyone looking around and going, this is a completely new team. I remember talking with Ryan Graves at first. He said, I'm a new guy, but looking around, everyone has the same vibe of there's a lot of new guys here. So everyone was kind of learning each other out. Everyone was kind of getting to know one another on the ice, off the ice, and going through all those motions. Heading into next season, it might be a lot of the same if players like Rickard Rakell, if players like Erik Karlsson, who knows what happens with the goalie situation. If all those changes happen, we could be having another one of those situations. Very much does seem likely that Erik Karlsson is on the move. The Penguins, sure, Kyle Dubas doesn't want to retain. After this season, $2.8 million comes off of the retention books. So there's a little bit of help there. Maybe you just immediately carry that 2.8 or even 3, bump it up a little if you need to get Erik Karlsson out. And like we mentioned, the salary cap is going to go up quite a bit next season and the season after and the season after that. So suddenly, and that's, I believe, the end of Karlsson's deal.
He has 2 years after this one.
Okay, so the last one doesn't matter too much. But over the next 2, that salary cap going up even makes $10 million look a bit more appealing. However, he is 34 now. Will be 35, then 36 in the final years of those deals. Of that deal. So maybe the Penguins will still have to retain, but with I just missed the names. Not Jack Johnson. That one's still there for another year. But with Jeff Petrie and Riley Smith coming off of the retention books, you'll have that extra flexibility to work with. And then in the last year of that, you will not have Jack Johnson on your buyout book. So a lot of cap space off the roster to work with.
Yeah, the number I'm kind of looking at is 2.5. That's the one that makes the most sense to me because it's still something you have to swallow as the Pittsburgh Penguins, but at the same time, you're going to have to get a $10 million player in their mid-30s off your books, and $7.5 million for Erik Karlsson looks much more appealing for a lot of other teams around the league, especially I understand that yesterday Jim Nill, the general manager of the Stars, said, yeah, we're not in on that. Like, Elliot can speculate, but we're not in on that. But in the summer, it does make some sense, and that does look like a team that would fit Erik Karlsson because the defensive structure is there, like we talked about on Tuesday. But again, 2.5 is the number that, it stings because you could sign a pretty decent player for $2.5 million, but you could also sign a couple decent players for $7.5 if you get Erik Karlsson off the books for the next couple of seasons. Let's continue to talk about trade deadline here, and there's been a couple of names that we've talked about already. Matt Grzelcyk, we talked about Tuesday. Anthony Beauvillier, we've talked about a couple of times. But Blake Lizotte is another player that I'm keeping my eye on in the next 8 days. He started off red hot with the Pittsburgh Penguins, had 8 goals and 12 points in his first 20 games played. So a fourth liner on pace for 48 points. That's a red hot start for Blake Lizotte with the Pittsburgh Penguins. He has cooled off considerably, though. Only 1 goal in his last 21 games played with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, part of that is he's played primarily with Matt Nieto and Noel Acciari. That has been his line for most of his time with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And eventually, when you're playing with those two, your offensive numbers, they are going to suffer. So maybe he was a little out over his skis to start the season, and he's been a little held back here in the last portion of the season at the same time. So I look at him as somebody that would be very appealing around the National Hockey League. He has a movable contract because there's 1 year left at $1.85 million. So when somebody's buying that, they're not just buying a rental, they're buying a fourth line piece for their year this year and next year. He's 27 years old, which means he's in the prime of his career. He's a pretty good skater. And I think he is an upgrade for some of these contenders. I looked around a lot of these playoff teams in the East and the West. Tampa Bay looks like a good fit for Blake Lizotte. Colorado looks like a good fit for Blake Lizotte. Columbus looks like a good fit for Blake Lizotte. I don't know what's going on in New Jersey, but Erik Haula is their fourth line center right now, and he's having a horrendous season. So maybe they reach out and try to get Blake Lizotte onto their roster so they can go up against a really good Carolina Hurricanes bottom six, which is what appears to be the first round matchup. It just feels to me that we haven't talked enough about Blake Lizotte simply because a lot of people think that the Penguins should hold on to him. And if they do, I'm not mad at all. I'm not advocating for him to get traded. I'm just saying going into the final 8-day stretch before the trade deadline, it makes a lot of sense that he is going to have some noise and some interest around him leading into the trade deadline.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think the LA Kings would take him back? I had the Kings roster up whenever you brought up the Erik Karlsson deal because I wanted to see what their defense looked like because they have a pretty stout defense most times, and Erik Karlsson needs a place he can go and play offense. Their current fourth line center is Trevor Lewis, who's 38. Has been around quite a bit. Maybe they don't want to replace the veteran down there. But, if you're looking for the youthful punch, Trevor Lewis only has 8 points this year, 4 goals, 4 assists. Maybe that's just an option they consider, bringing him back on the deal that he on his deal. It's just a name. It's just a name I threw up because if we're throwing out names, I was already on the Kings roster.
Yeah,
looked at it and went, you know what? There's the connection already there. The Kings look to be a really good team and might try and buy a little bit this time around. They also desperately need to beat the Oilers in the playoffs for once.
Yeah,
not sure if Blake Lizotte gives them over that hump, but it's a way to build, and I just haven't looked around at many other teams, and you never know. Would the Kings be interested in taking a player like him back?
Yeah, Trevor Lewis is on the last year of his contract making $800,000. So if you want to bolster that bottom six, if you want to give yourself another option going into a playoff series, it wouldn't be a bad pick for the LA Kings to say, hey, let's bring back Blake Lizotte. Now, I think they probably would have done so in free agency, especially considering Lizotte's contract wasn't all that expensive, but who knows? Maybe they look at this and say the grass wasn't greener on the other side. Let's bring back Blake Lizotte and see if it works in a second stint. It's not like NHL teams don't always do this. Hence the reason we're watching P.O. Joseph play on the first pairing next to Kris Letang. So I wouldn't rule it out. I'm just throwing out names of teams that I think that he would fit for, that he would be an improvement for. Did I say Columbus earlier as well?
Ooh.
I mean, you look at the Columbus Blue Jackets. I might have said it, but you look at the Columbus Blue Jackets, a team that right now is just flying by the seat of their pants, doing things that nobody expected them to do. I don't think they're going to want to put it all in for this year simply because they're a wild card team and it seems like they might be a little ahead of schedule. So you don't want to start trading first round picks, second round picks to bring in big names, but you do want to reward the guys that are there. And I think bringing in a Blake Lizotte, somebody who can kill penalties, somebody who does have that offensive touch. If you put him with somebody that has any offensive capabilities, sorry again to Nola Chari, it's basically the skeleton of his past that's playing at this point, but there's no offense coming from Achari. There's no offense coming from Matt Nieto. Boko Imama, what he does well, but what he does is not offense. So the Penguins' fourth line has never really given Blake Lizotte opportunities to score, and yet he still had that stretch of 20 games, which is a quarter of a season, where he was on pace for 48 points. So he has that in him. He's young. He has 1 year left on his deal. I think that's a move for a team like Columbus, a team like Detroit, although Detroit's depth looks pretty good at the center ice position, a team like Ottawa, if they truly believe this is the year that they need to punch back into the playoffs. Those are the teams that I'm looking at that should be the most interested in a Blake Lizotte, but he could also potentially be that missing piece in a bottom six for a true cup contender like a Tampa Bay, like a Colorado, like a New Jersey Devils.
Yeah, I like the Columbus option a lot because this team is so wild. Truthfully, how are they doing this?
Zach Werenski is an animal. That's how they're doing it.
Zach Werenski deserves the Norris this year.
Yeah, he'll get it.
Yeah,
he's scoring.
Yeah, that's a big piece of it. I mean, sure, their goaltending is still very questionable and might not be good in the playoffs. But, I mean, they've had an injury list matching your grocery list. It's been incredible what they've done this year. And their bottom six right now looks like it could use a punch of Blake Lizotte, even if whenever they get healthy, things kind of filter out. Blake Lizotte could still fill in on their bottom six somewhere. Their bottom two centers right now are Justin Danforth and Sean Corrali. Maybe someone bumps to a wing. Maybe someone moves around. Also, whoever the Penguins get in return in this sort of deal. Who knows? I think the Columbus is also in that position because they're not necessarily trying to buy big. They know that they're kind of playing with house money, which is a great thing to play with, especially this time of year. But that doesn't mean you go all in and go for the Elias Petterssons, who's having a bad year anyway.
Mhm.
You don't go for the biggest names on the trade market. You kind of go for those, well, the little guys that, maybe they help us this year, maybe they help us continue playing with house money, and going into next, if they build a better lineup and continue this trend, suddenly you still have Blake Lizotte with an extra year.
Yeah.
I think he fits in Columbus perfectly, now that you say that.
Yeah, you reward your team for playing well. And I think that's the position that the Columbus Blue Jackets are in, and not a position to go out and say, yeah, let's get Mikko Rantanen. Like that doesn't fit Columbus. It doesn't fit, maybe New Jersey. Nah, it doesn't fit New Jersey, but it doesn't fit like the Ottawas and the Detroits.
Mm-hmm.
But Blake Lizotte makes a lot of sense. Now, before we move on and talk about this weekend, let's wrap up our trade deadline discussion with this. I'm going to say a player name, a player that may be available for trade. You tell me yes or no. Are they going to be in trade talks in the next week? Michael Bunting.
No, I don't think. I think the Penguins like him too much still.
Rickard Rakell.
He will be, but he's not going until the summer.
Okay. Vincent Desharnais.
I forgot the Penguins had him. Doubtful. Again, look into the summer, maybe during next season. I don't know enough about him.
Any interest in Noel Acciari?
Kyle Dubas loves him so much. There should be.
Anybody else at this point?
Yeah, there should be interest because he can bring something specific.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, again, highly doubtful. Does he appear in talks or in rumors or in conversations? Unlikely.
And let's close it off with Alex Nedeljkovic.
Yeah, I could see that one popping up. I could see him or Jari to a degree. Again, I know Jari's in the A and is struggling.
Yeah.
But I'll stand by that if Edmonton, if that'd be the first place I think of, gets desperate for an option. He's won in that town before. It's closer to home. I could see Jari being an option out in Edmonton. As for Nedeljkovic, yeah, I think so. The Penguins are in such a weird spot with goaltending. They have prospects ready to take the reins or at least take the next step. And who knows what's going on with Jari.
Mm-hmm.
The goaltending is going to be interesting. I could see Nedeljkovic's name for the second straight year popping up in those conversations, even if he does have an extra year.
If Tristan Jari is traded in the next 8 days, I'm going to be afraid of the other shoe to drop because Kyle Dubas is going to have to sell his soul to get another GM to eat that contract for him. We might have to give up one of the bridges in Pittsburgh, and it's not going to be one of the 420 that you haven't heard of. It's going to be like a Warhol or Clemente bridge that you're going to have to give up for Tristan Jari to move. So I don't see another GM sitting there saying, yeah, let me take Tristan Jari, because I think that's what we need as an organization, is to take on 3 more years of a goaltender who is now in his second stint at the American Hockey League level. So I agree. Never say never, but never, to quote Mike Tomlin. Let's close off this episode with a look at this weekend for the Pittsburgh Penguins. It's another stretch of 3 games in 4 days. I don't know what the NHL schedule makers are doing to the Pittsburgh Penguins, but one of the oldest teams in the NHL, coming off of the Four Nations break, where their captain was the oldest player in that tournament, and they play 3 games in 4 days against all division rivals, get 1 day off, which was yesterday, and now they play 3 games in 4 days again, and it's not like they're playing some scrubs. They're playing Philly again, who just wiped them out on Tuesday, and then they play Boston and Toronto back-to-back. At least it's all at PPG Paints Arena, but as of right now, it's looking like another tough, difficult weekend for the Pittsburgh Penguins organization. They sit in 6th place in the draft lottery rankings, 1 point up on the Seattle Kraken, 2 points up on the Buffalo Sabres, and the Sabres have 4 games in hand, and 8 points up on the Nashville Predators. Predators have 3 games in hand on the Pittsburgh Penguins, and that is for the 3rd position in the NHL draft lottery. So that's all that we're looking at as far as the atmosphere of the Penguins. We're not looking up anymore. We're looking down and looking at those teams. The question that I have for you, Horwat, is, considering the schedule and considering the lay of the land right now in the NHL, at least the bottom of the standings in the NHL, could we see the Penguins fall into the 4th spot in the NHL draft lottery by the next time we record on Tuesday?
That's extremely likely. The best chance they have at winning for quite a while, I look at the schedule ahead and it's kind of scary.
Yes.
The best chance they have of winning for quite a while is tonight against the Flyers. After that, it's Boston. They play Boston a lot. They play Boston a lot better recently, and Boston is kind of in a weird gong show situation. But I'm giving Boston the edge just because the Penguins look so bad nowadays. Toronto is an interesting one. Again, they play Toronto well sometimes. Just seems unlikely. And then I know that's kind of where the conversation is supposed to end for us. Then they go for a quick Western trip against Colorado, Vegas, and Minnesota. Back home against Vegas. They might roll through the trade deadline without having a win. So, yeah, I'd say we very well could be discussing top 5 lottery selection by the next time we come sit behind our microphones.
Now, to give the Penguins credit, they are 3-3 against the 3 teams they're going to take on this weekend. But I already mentioned they got absolutely whitewashed by the Philadelphia Flyers on Tuesday, 6-1. And their 2 wins against Boston and Toronto came in that small stretch between Thanksgiving and Christmas Day, where they were one of the better teams in hockey. They beat Boston 2-1 in November, which, do we really think they're going to be able to win a 2-1 hockey game anytime soon? No, they've been giving up 6 goals a game since the Four Nations break. So 2-1 is probably out of the question. They're 1-1 against Toronto, but again, that was back in November, and they counted on the power play, a power play in which, so far since the Four Nations break, is operating back at 2024 levels at 14%. So when I look at this, I say, yeah, there's a chance that the Pittsburgh Penguins win a hockey game out of these 3 or win 2 hockey games out of these 3. But the prevailing theory right now is that the Pittsburgh Penguins are one of the worst teams in the league. And even if they're going up against a Philadelphia Flyers team that is right there in the standings above them, even if they're going up against a Boston Bruins team who is as weak as they have been in probably a decade, and even if they're going up against a Toronto team that can disappear at times, the Pittsburgh Penguins don't have good goaltending. Like I mentioned, 6.3 goals allowed per game in the last 3 games and -9 goals saved above expected. So you can blame the defense all you want. The defense has been bad, but nearly half of the goals that were given up shouldn't have gone in if these goaltenders are playing at a league average level. That's not a recipe for success, especially against 3 teams that, one, have either beaten you in the last week handily, or teams that just have a higher pedigree like Boston and Toronto.
Yep, it's just going to be a thumping, I think. It's sure the pedigree, sure the Penguins have had pedigree all for the last 2 decades as well. Mm-hmm. But something about this year, some of the last few games that we've played, it's been ugly. It's been just horrid vibes all around. I'm interested to see, how the next week goes with the trade deadline looming. But it's not going to be pretty. A couple afternoon games, everyone's favorite this weekend. A couple afternoon games, and just, it's not going to be fun. It's very much not going to be fun. I mean, regardless of pedigree, Boston has obscene skill in terms of David Pastrnak, Brad Marchand for the most part. Charlie McAvoy's not there. All right, so they don't have obscene skill, but David Pastrnak can eat a team alive on his own. The Maple Leafs have obscene skill. Mm-hmm. And sure, they have the tendency to disappear. This isn't the playoffs, though. This is still the regular season.
Yeah. They're
still going to have it, on full tilt. So national TV, no less, for both Boston and Toronto. This is going to be an ugly, ugly weekend for the Penguins. Their last redeeming game for quite a while might be tonight. Again, national game. But, hey, it's the Flyers. Rivalry games are always fun. Mm-hmm. They are giving away a Max Talbot bobblehead tonight. That's fun.
And they have a T-shirt, too, that I saw yesterday that looks really cool. I've never wished I lived in Pittsburgh so I could just go to the arena and get one of those T-shirts more than I do today.
Venmo me. Maybe I'll buy one for you. Me and my buddy, Megan and my buddy are going tonight.
Hey, let me know how much it is, because I might actually do that. But
I will let you know. But yeah, it's gonna be an interesting weekend. It's gonna be an interesting week. And like I said, the schedule doesn't get easier as the trade deadline approaches. Hitting the road to take on Colorado. And the day of the deadline, they play Vegas. I know it's a 10 o'clock game, so well after the deadline. But man, it's not going to be an easy run. I'm interested to see what happens. And as the schedule eases a bit, quote unquote, post deadline, this team might still get eaten alive because there's going to be nobody here to defend them.
Now, the other part of this is the other teams, because other teams have to lose as well, or have to win, I should say, for the Penguins to continue to fall. You look at Seattle, they play Vancouver, Minnesota, Nashville. So 2 tough ones where they probably are going to have an uphill battle. And then Nashville, which is in this list. Buffalo goes up against Carolina, and then a home and home against Montreal. So there's a door open there for them to win a game or two. And Nashville goes up against Winnipeg. Not going to win that one. And then the Islanders and the Rangers, 2 games that are very winnable for the Nashville Predators. So again, it's going to be an exhilarating race to the bottom, Horwat. Nobody's going to catch the bottom 2 teams, which I believe are Chicago and San Jose. They are well below everybody. I believe the Penguins are, I got to look it up, but I think they're over like 10 points, 15 points ahead of some of these teams.
Yeah, San Jose sitting dead last with 38 with a 15-36-8 record. Penguins have 55 points. So there's that gap of 38 to 55, at least in between the Penguins and the Sharks. The Blackhawks only a couple of points up on the Sharks with the 17-34
games
for
with like 20 games left is too much.
Yeah. And the Penguins have no games in hand on anyone. The Sabres, you told me this one, are 4 games behind the Penguins.
Yeah.
With only 2 points separating them. So there goes those. I'm sure Sabres might jump the Penguins. I mean, the Sabres were supposed to be really good this year. That hasn't happened.
Well, and here's the thing. They have a lot more to play for, too. That's a young team that's trying to prove themselves still. The Penguins, as of right now, have a lot of guys that, I mean, I don't think Sidney Crosby's going to phone it in. But if Erik Karlsson stays on this roster, I'm not going to say he's not trying, but if you look at the last 3 games, the effort is questionable. So I don't know.
Post deadline, if Karlsson is still here, let him run free.
Take the reins off. What do you have to lose?
Exactly. Especially in those last couple of weeks, maybe the 2 weeks after the deadline, once things are really out of hand, just tell Mike Sullivan, or like lock Mike Sullivan in a cage and say, we're letting Erik Karlsson just play his game. Okay, we need to up his trade value as much as we can for the summer.
Yeah.
Let Erik Karlsson run loose. Let him just play offense. Let him make those obscene mistakes in the defensive zone. Who cares? He's scoring at an incredible rate. And then next year you let Mike Sullivan back out because we know he's not getting fired. And then you work back with a different defense. Mm-hmm. Let him run loose. Let's see what he can do in this system. Man, we really haven't seen that yet, have we?
Yeah, it'd be nice to see Team Sweden version of Erik Karlsson to close out the season, because if he makes those defensive mistakes, oh well. Right? I mean, cool. You have a better chance of getting the number 1 overall pick. That's at this point something that a lot of the fans are hoping for. So I don't think anybody would be upset to see Erik Karlsson get to run wild here in the last month or 2 of the NHL season. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Or you can check us out anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.